Welcome to the Radical Lifestyle Podcast, brought to you by Generation to Generation, where you will be inspired by the past, equipped for the present, and prepared for the future as we engage in conversations with people from around the world. Okay, today we want to talk about a subject that we have to address all over the world. And when we do conferences or we speak to leaders, there's often a lot of hurt and pain when they share with us about the problems that they're facing with their kids because a consequence of their work in the church has meant a lot of hurt and pain for their children. And so we want to talk a bit about this subject and explore one of the reasons why this is that we found all around the world. And when we talk to people about it and give them our thoughts, it helps them realize, what it is that maybe they've been doing, which they can improve on to make this experience much more a healthy experience for them, for their family, for their kids. So we want to talk a bit about this. Now, for those of you that are watching this on YouTube, this is a part of a Radical Lifestyle podcast. If you aren't subscribed, there's a lot of conversations that we've been having with people from different countries, from all around the world, from different walks of life, about things that they're doing, different expertise. So if you want to see or listen to these other conversations we're having, go subscribe to the podcast. It's on all the various major podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, all of these places. So go subscribe if you like it. It's helpful for us. Just if you give us a 5-star rating and maybe leave a great comment, it's helpful for getting the word out there. So okay, let's jump into this subject. So I guess I'll give an example of what we're talking about, a place where we've been, where people talked about this struggle that they're having, and then let's dive into some of this issue. So this was last year. We were in Brazil, and we were doing a conference, and during a break we were meeting with probably 25-30 pastors, people in ministry from all over Brazil. And they proceeded to talk to us about their hurts and pains within the family, and how a lot of their kids had got into all kinds of problems and had walked away from the church or from the ministry. Not that they were in ministry themselves, but because of the hurt and pain that they had been dealt or that they were walking through because of their parents being involved with ministry, these leaders in this meeting just broke down. All of them started weeping. So we started to dive into this subject, and what it came down to was the question of God, ministry, family. Now, we often hear over the years people talk about these three things, and people are constantly wrestling with the order. What comes first, second, third? Now, naturally people will go, well, God is first, and then it's a wrestle between family and ministry, and often the way it's fleshed out, it's God, ministry, and family comes third. It's the least important of those three things, and as a result there's all kinds of hurt and pain as we walk through these things.
Of course, if you put family before ministry, it presents problems because you're very often being paid, and even if you're not, people have an expectation of your priorities for ministry, and you're being pulled on. People don't understand if you're not there for them. It's perceived you're not doing your job well if you're not done it. So even if you flip it round the other way, there's problems.
Right, and in reality, if you're in a paid position, the bosses or whoever's put you in that position in the church will be expecting you to meet the requirements. And often the requirements is that you meet the ministry needs, and family is put on the back burner. And I'm not saying it's necessarily their fault, but it's a bit of a blind spot when it comes to this issue.
Yeah, and I don't think when they appoint someone, they think your family will come third. I don't think they think that. It's just something that happens with the pressures. And of course, lots of the demands of ministry are when children are home from school or weekends. I mean, weekends when the kids are off on a Sunday. How do you put family before ministry on a Sunday? It is a dilemma.
And so the natural outworking is that ministry comes before the family.
Very often.
And so we often give an example. Give the negative example first, and then later we'll talk about how we see it fleshing out if a pastor or a ministry leader's at home and they get a phone call.
Yeah.
So give the example of how that would normally flesh out.
Yeah. Well, often, let's say a Sunday, you get up, probably the father or the mother, they have a worship leading, or they have preaching. I have to get to the church and say everything's okay before people start arriving. So they probably say, bye, we're off, jump in the car, and they've gone. They get to the church, they're praying, they're seeing to people, the children arrive, they go off to the children's ministry, youth ministry, or they're running around just waiting. And then the father, even if they're in the celebration with the parents, the father's often sitting at the front and the children are sitting at the back. Afterwards, they are talking with people. The children might want their attention, but the father is talking with other people, or the parents are talking with other people. They can't get their attention. They go home. Parents are exhausted. They might just put their feet up after lunch. But half of the day on a Sunday is spent in separation. But can I bring this back to the question we asked at the beginning about what comes first, second, and third?
Yeah, well, if you're going to give our response to it, I was going to save that.
Oh, okay, let's save it then. We'll leave people wondering.
So people can wonder how we see those three.
Okay.
The other example we often give is if a pastor or ministry leader's at home, let's say it's not Sunday, and the phone rings and someone says, someone from the church, from the ministry is in hospital, they're sick, they need someone to go. So, and this is something that ministry leaders, they do all over the place. They go visit people from the church who are in hospital. And so if they're down for a family meal, the phone rings, you get this call, they're normally up, leave the wife, the kids are at home, they then go off, and then they're gone for the rest of the evening or that night, praying for this person from the church. So the negative side is then the family has been left out, they've been left behind, they're not a part of it. The parents have been taken away from them during what is often maybe the family time. So, and then you've given numerous examples of how families left out as well during a Sunday, maybe because the parents are off doing what they do. So we find this question that people are wrestling with all over the world. This isn't a new thing. And often people tell us this is something they're taught in seminary as well, that, you know, there are these three things. You have to get the order right, the priorities straight, and often as a result, again, family comes.
And of course, when the parents go, or when the children are left out, or they haven't got access to their parents, often when they need them, not just want them, who are they going to blame? I mean, they know their parents are in ministry because God called them. I mean, that's standard statement. God called us in. We're doing this for Jesus. We're serving him, etc., etc. So who are they going to blame? They're going to blame God, blame Jesus, because what he has asked the parents to do causes them pain. And they're hurt. I can remember an example. There was a worship leader, and she was, I think it was a worship practice, or it was before the service anyway, and the worship team was singing, and this child was probably about 3, and another person was holding the child at the back of the church while the mother was leading worship, and the child was crying and crying to the mother, and she was reaching towards the mother, and of course the whole thing is, well, you mustn't interrupt, so the other person took them out the room, and that child was crying for the mother. So even at that early age, here is the pain of I can't access my mother. 3 years old, I need my mum, and she is worshipping Jesus, and I can't access her. So that's an example that really touched my heart when that happened. And of course, in a minute, we can talk about how all these examples can be redeemed, can't we?
Yeah. And we did a conference in, I think it was South Korea. There's a few thousand pastors. And again, almost all of them had issues on this front because of a message passed on from their parents that God had told me to do this. He's put us in this position. As a result, there's a cost on the family. You're least important. Other priorities come before you. So this isn't something where just a few people are wrestling with this. This is something actually worldwide that they're all dealing with.
And of course, it hasn't got to be people in full-time ministry.
Right.
It's often with children's pastors, youth pastors, leaders of small groups in any area of ministry. When it comes to God called me to do it, we're entering a whole other realm. It's different from secular work. And
Right.
then they just straight blame the parents.
Yes.
I mean, that's a straight deal. You've got this job and you're doing it. This one, though, has a big backlash,
Right.
because ultimately it lands on God's doorstep.
God gets the blame for this one. He put you in that position. I'm hurt because of the position. God's fault.
Yeah.
So often they end up rebelling against God, the church, walking away and getting involved with all kinds of stuff.
And the parents kind of get the backlash for that often. Although there are cases where they, inverted commas, just blame God and still maintain a good relationship with the parents.
Right.
Which of course is devastating. But often the parents get the backlash as well. But the ultimate person who gets the blame is God himself, because they responded to his call.
Yeah, so God, family, ministry, the question we often get asked is, what order do these go in?
Well,
and so our response to that is...
you can't answer it because it's the wrong question.
Right. So what is... I mean, it's not even really a question, but the answer to the wrong question is...
It isn't first, second or third. The answer is integration.
Okay, integration.
Yeah.
So there is no first, second, third.
No.
Obviously, God, overall, obviously, that's a priority. But how do these three things then work together?
But it's God in my family, God in my ministry, my family involved in my ministry involved in my family, and it's an integrated, you can't say, well, it's God first and family third, because God is in your family and God is in your ministry. But where it isn't connected often is my family is involved with my ministry, and my ministry is part of my family. So there isn't any pulling or tugging. And that is the answer we give. And it's interesting to see pastors' reactions when they hear that, isn't it?
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, the room of the pastors in Brazil, they all just wept when they realised what they'd done. They said, we haven't been taught. We were told this other way in seminary. No one ever told us about this. So let's go back to a few examples that we talked about earlier in the negative. So let's go with the worship leader. Yeah. And what ended up happening after they'd heard this? What was their response?
Well, I actually addressed that at the time because I was in leadership in the church myself and I knew the people really well. And I went after the person who took the child out the room and I said, give them to me. And the child knew me. So she came and I walked back into the hall. I walked right up the front where the worship leader was and I put the child in the worship leader's arms. And of course the child tucked her head into the worship leader's shoulder and just cuddled. And the practice went on with the mother cuddling this little girl. She didn't interrupt it. And even if she had, you can't worship Jesus with your own child in pain. I can imagine where Jesus' eyes would have gone and where his attention would have gone. And so, it just brought it together to integration, and that child was in the mother's arms during the worship. And she calmed down and she just hugged, and the mother continued on and the worship team continued on.
And I think it's that same person, maybe it's a different one, where the girl just wanted to be with her mum in the church. And so they ended up taking up a children's keyboard because the mum played the keyboard. Is that the same
person,
one? A different person.
Yeah.
So similar situation though. And so the child wanted to play the keyboard with her mum. She had a little children's one. Didn't work, wasn't plugged in or anything. But they set up her keyboard next to her mum's keyboard in the worship team. So while her mum was leading worship and playing the keyboard, she was just worshipping away, playing her keyboard next to her mum.
Yeah, and the father was on the front row. We're not talking about disrupting ministry.
Right.
But we're not, if that child had been running around the platform and just playing up, I would not have been happy with that.
Yeah.
We're not talking about raising children in an atmosphere of irreverence or disruption. I mean,
Yeah.
you've got to be disciplined in every area of life.
Yeah,
So
she was fully engaged.
She was engaged, and the father was in the front row ready just to go and get her, or for her to go back to the father. So I don't want to give the impression that we allow kids to run riot, because discipline is high on the agenda. But yes, I mean, the creativity to integrate your family is what's needed.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to the other example where family's at home having a meal, the phone rings, someone's sick. What happens? What could people do?
Well, people could do it. So the father picks up the phone and says, yes, so-and-so's in hospital. Let's all stop for a moment, gives them a piece of paper, write something for so-and-so. What's Jesus saying to them? Write a prayer. Let's pray. Let's lay hands on these. Puts them in an envelope, and then looks around at his children and say, whose turn is it to come with me? And of course all the children go, me. And he says, no, it's your turn, Johnny. You come with me. And the others going, oh, and they say, no, your turn will be next time. So they get in the car and they head off to the hospital. And what are they doing in the car? They're talking, they may be singing, they're having fun in the car together and sharing, they're having quality time. And you get to the hospital and you take something for the child to do while they're there, if you're going to be fully engaged, but you take the child in, the child with you prays for the person. Now, this has got to be presuming you've got access and the person isn't so desperately ill. I'm talking about the average thing. And you pray for the person, and the child gives the letters to them, and spend what time you need to. And then you say to the child, shall we go for an ice cream or drink on the way home? And oh yes, let's do that. So you may do it in the hospital on the way home, and you go, what would you like to have? And you have that time together again, and you get home, maybe the other children are in bed, and say, well, you had a late night, let's go and pray together and I'll tuck you up in bed. Thank you for spending that special time with me. And so the father leaving the house, or it could have been the mother, becomes something special that the children are actually fighting for it to be that turn. It becomes a blessing. It becomes something they almost long for, because they're going to get special time with you, instead of it being the thing that tears you apart.
And then, I mean, even bringing it back here with us growing up, when we were kids, you integrated us into the ministry. If you were speaking at a conference, you knew ultimately your first goal was to raise me, my younger sister, your daughter, was to train and prepare us before it was to train and prepare anyone else.
Yeah.
And so if we were at a conference and we would be like 6 years old or something, or really young, not much to say to help anyone really, we'd be at a conference, couple hundred people, and before you would start speaking to train other people, you would bring us onto the stage, you would give us the microphone and say, is there anything you want to tell them? And I probably talked about Manchester United or something really deep and profound, and moved everyone and converted them to the Manchester United ways. Anyway, so we would do that, and after I had nothing to say, give you the microphone, I would walk off, and then you would carry on with the conference.
But you also served. You were at the book table. You were part of that. You felt you had responsibility. And I did consult with you about things. Now, you were never made responsible because it was mine, but we even had examples where both you and your sister had checks in their heart about where we should go.
Right.
And it didn't make sense, but I took notice, and in actual fact, you were right.
Yeah. So even people would see you doing this, incorporating us into the things that we were doing. And often people talked about, we would share the message, we would speak about the message from the pulpit or from the platform, and they would say, but we've seen this happen with you, which is the best example. And even with what you're talking about, one example of that would be my younger sister still does going to the US, and we're I don't know how old she was at the time, but she felt like we shouldn't go to America, which was very odd. So you don't want to go to America? She's like, I don't know, something doesn't feel right. So we end up speaking to the people who invite us to go to New York to speak at a conference, and made the decision off of her feeling like that it was probably right that we didn't go.
Right.
As it transpired, we would have been in New York during 9/11.
And another example with you, we were going to Kuwait, and you were saying, I mean, you must have been about 13, probably, something like that. You say, well, I don't think we should go. And I'm thinking, are you sick? Because you love going to these out of the way different places, and here you are saying we don't think we should go. So I listened, and again, I have to take responsibility. It's not about putting adult responsibilities on children, but it's about that they feel heard. So and you do hear them. So I wrote to the people there, and I didn't question it. I just said, yeah, we're looking forward to coming.
Don't say why.
Why?
It may not be a good idea to say on the mic specifically why.
So anyway, I wrote to them and said, should we come? And they wrote back quite a long email with all sorts of things. Then right in the middle was the clue as to why we shouldn't go, because there was a specific
reason why we, at the time, would not have been allowed into the country.
Yes.
Yes.
So, we could have arrived at the border and been turned away if you hadn't. So, integration includes honour.
And just going back to something you hinted at it before, but we didn't make decisions for the ministry as kids. This isn't about people going, right, we'll give kids decision making in the ministry. No. It was you saying, I want to hear your voice, but ultimately, after you'd heard us, you would be the one that made the decision. We know some people hear us giving this kind of talk, and later on we find out they've put them into leadership positions and they can run riot, so to speak. So that's not what we're talking about.
No, but we are talking about developing character and developing responsibility. And I can remember that you and Daniela used to do the book table and served, and you've always served me. Right. You've always served me. It's not just that you wanted the limelight. And
often we didn't want the limelight.
No, but I made you take it. And you'd do the book table, and I'd come along and start arranging the books, and you'd look at me and go, I've just arranged them. And I had stepped back because you did the book table, you arranged it, and whether it was to perfection for me, it's not that it was your responsibility. So responsibility grew, and I think one of the things that happened as you got older, I would hear you talking to me in the kitchen or wherever about something biblical connected with the ministry, the message, and you'd be passionate about it, and you kept saying, and when I heard your passion, I would put you on the platform to talk about that thing that you've been passionate about. And obviously when you were real small, you got away with Manchester United, but as you got older, it was biblical, it was God, it was to do with the ministry, it was to do with the message, and you began to take that message on yourself. And then I released you to have proper responsibility on the platform. So, you've got to know your kids, and you've got to raise them in ministry the same as you would in every other aspect of life.
Yeah, and as we got older, like you said, you would help us to find what's our sort of identity within this. Are there certain parts of the ministry's message that we gravitated towards more, and then you helped us to find our way of communicating that. So it wasn't just, we might take elements of what you talk about, kind of the backbone of it, and then we would put our own flesh to it and develop that ourselves to the point where now, we have our whole parts that we've been developing ourselves.
Yeah. But I've just thought of one really important thing. There is a big fear amongst people in ministry that they can't make their children special. Big. Well, if my children are seen to come in my office, if my children are be seen to do these other things, everybody will say, well, I'm making my children special. What about the others? You can't do it. And that is a huge stumbling block, I think. Really huge. It's a lie. It is a total lie. You can make your children special. You should make your children special. Now, if anybody had come to me and said that, you can't make your children special, I would have said, they never did. Right. If they had, I would have said, I can make my children special, and you can make your children special. You serve Jesus in whatever area, as I do, and make your children special. Because I see so many children being pushed away. I would say, especially in children or youth ministry, when the others are all clambering, they push their own children to one side.
Yeah, in fact, they proactively make other kids special above their own kids.
Yeah, because they think, well, I've got time with them at home, etc. But I think what a poor model that is, that families, that other parents see you pushing your own children on one side, because when they're in the ministry, they will. So can I tell a story about that?
Mm-hmm.
So we were in America, and obviously it was America because the church had a gym.
And so this isn't disconnected. This is, again, as an example of incorporating your roles and the family and God all together. So.
Yeah, and the issue of your children can be special.
Right.
Bring it all together. So I'd been at that church and we'd done Pastors Leaders Conference, and I'd talked about this issue of making your children special. Anyway, the next time we went back, somebody who was the caretaker, swept the floors, etc., came to me and said, Daphne, I was in the hall when you talked about making your children special. Oh, okay. He said, I want to tell you what happened. I said, okay. He said, my children asked if they could go to the gym with me when I was cleaning it. And I said to them, no, children are not allowed in the gym unless they're with youth ministry, children's ministry, or at certain times, so no, you can't come. He said, then I heard what you said about making your children special. So I went back and I said to my children, do you still want to come to the gym when I clean it? And they nearly fell over because I'd said no all this time. And they said, well, yes. I said, well, you can. So when I went to clean the gym, they came down. I don't know what they did there, probably played basketball or something, for the duration when he was cleaning the gym. And he said, it was a while later that the pastor's children came to me. And they said, can we come with you when you go to the gym with your dad? And here is the line that sums it all up. The pastor's children, the caretaker's children said to the pastor's children, no, you can't. Your dad is only the pastor. Mine is the caretaker. And I thought, what a beautiful example that is of the children being proud of the ministry their father had, seeing the benefits, and over that of saying, well, they're the pastor's kid, and I'm the caretaker's kid, and this is what I do. So that is another lie that has gone out. Yes, you make your children special. That doesn't mean you reject others. But yes, your children can do what others can't do. They can go where others can't go when you're there. Right.
Yeah, God gives you these gifts, these positions to be a blessing to your kids.
Exactly.
Not to cause them hurt and pain, but to be a blessing to them.
Yeah, and if it's not blessing them, then something is wrong.
Yeah, some hard decisions need to be made.
Yeah, and I wonder how often people sit with their children and talk about this with them and say, tell me. And again, I want to repeat, I'm not talking about lack of discipline and kids just demanding this and demanding that. This has to be within the context of healthy relationships and growing healthy kids.
And when you say kids, you're not just talking about children, you're talking about teenagers
I'm talking about teenagers as well. Right. And I'm talking about even beyond that.
Right.
And about adults as well. They need to still feel, obviously it grows in maturity, but they still need to know that they're special.
If you go from the other side then, let's go to church leadership.
Right.
Say they appoint someone. Now, when you were in church leadership, you were overseeing departments. And I know that when you met with them to talk about how things were going, one of your key focuses was on their families.
Yeah.
So talk about that, and then maybe just give advice to maybe churches and how they can help their pastors, their leaders with their family.
Yeah, I very rarely see, if you've got lines of accountability and say you were accountable to me in leadership, the first thing we would talk about is your family. Well, your relationship with Jesus, but it's all wrapped up in one. And I would be wanting to meet with your whole family at times and talking and say, how's it going, what's happening, and honouring the whole family. And yet very rarely do I see that happen. They will meet with the person they're accountable to, talk about the ministry, plans, etc. But family isn't the priority. And if you haven't got a healthy family, then the rest of it, I don't think, is going to be healthy, because you take that family DNA into it. And, I see times when maybe you have a leadership day and you've got all the leaders there, and often the husband and wives, but where's the children? Sometimes something is put on for the children, but I think that time needs to be special for the children, something they look forward to when their parents are going, and that there are times when they're integrated together. There is one ministry, PAS, in Brazil, and they actually have special weekends or weeks or camps
sort of
for pastors' children, so that there is something that they feel honoured and excited about and can talk through. So, I mean, the bottom line in all this is, if you're caring for somebody, you automatically have a responsibility to care for their family, I believe.
Yeah. So, for those people that are listening or watching this, if you're in a position within the church, ultimately,
or ministry,
use it to be a blessing for your family, for your kids, because if it doesn't bless them, the natural order is that they then blame God because he's the one that put you in that position, and it's devastating. We see it all over the world, people weeping over this issue. And
missionary kids, there's the MKPK thing.
Missionary kids. Yeah. So, let's realign things. Let's stop wrestling with this question, and please talk to other people about this. There is no God, ministry, family, what order, how do we do this? It's integration, all woven together, using ministry to bless the family. So let's realign these things, and let's see ultimately kids, the next generation, being blessed by what it is that God has called you into.
Yes, and there is a podcast we've done by Josiah Huber, who was raised in ministry, and I what's it called?
I don't think we've actually titled that one yet.
Well, when you see one by Josiah Huber, go and look for it, because he's a living example of this on the mission field, and I think if what we have said today and the principles, etc., he actually talks quite incidentally about the whole thing as he talks about his life when there were things that happened that could have been devastating, but were not. So I know in some ways you're an example of it too, but it would be interesting to people to go over and listen to his podcast.
Yeah, and again, if you're watching this on YouTube, we have a whole load of conversations we've had with people on our podcast platforms, from Apple to Spotify, Google, Stitcher, all that stuff. So if you want to go and see all of that, go over to those platforms, subscribe, and I'll put the link to Josiah podcast in the description for this one. So if people want to see that, they can go to the description box for that.
I hope this has at least made people think. And I can imagine it will bring up some pain in some people.
We've seen that pain all over the world.
But I just want to say something to speak hope into that situation. God loves your children more than you do. He's after them harder than you are, and it is not too late. And I was talking to one pastor whose son had just completely fallen away, God, everything, and he lived about 3 hours away from them. And I said to the father, have you ever gone to spend a lunch hour with your son? And he said, he lives 3 hours away. I said, yeah, have you ever gone to visit him in his lunch hour? He said, oh, no. He said, I could go and visit this person, that person while I'm there and go and do this. I said, no. Have you ever been just to spend a lunch hour with your son? Well, I think he thought I was crazy. I said, how would that make your son feel that you would travel 3 hours just to spend his lunch hour? And he thought about it, and he went and he did it. And of course the son was saying, well, why are you here? Where else are you going? And of course he could repeat it. He said, I've just come to spend my lunch hour with you. And that was a real turning point in the relationship. So, look for those moments that it is redeemable. And by adopting this principle of integration, even at this stage, and of making them special, because I think many of these kids know they have disappointed their parents. They know that this isn't it, and they will so easily feel second rate They live in that disappointment, and so we need to overcome that by saying we are that father who is standing looking for you, and we will run to meet you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If it inspired you, please rate us and subscribe on Apple or Google Podcasts, Spotify, or another podcast platform.